Science alone can't be the only reason why black women are dying, do you know what I mean, at that crazy rate in comparison to white people. For me, a very large element is bias. It's a really sad day when what is a potential vote on, like, do we stop children being murdered and massacred, turns into, oh, I could use this for political gain. What's up, my people? Welcome back to another episode of It's That Deep, the podcast, a podcast where literally everything is that deep, as per the name. I am your host. My name is Feyisara. Thank you so much for joining me for either another or an episode of It's That Deep. I really appreciate it. I hope all of you are well. I hope you have had good and fruitful and productive weeks. I feel like my mood is starting to pick up because it's no longer pitch black at 4 p.m. I'm not really a winter babe. So now that, you know, the sun is shining a bit longer in the day, it's gingering me. I love it. I've also had a good week because, drum roll, It's That Deep was featured in The Independent this week in a national newspaper as one of the podcasts that you should be listening to. That's crazy. Like, I literally said last week we hit double digits. I have not been doing this long. So the fact that we're getting press, that's sick. You know what I mean? Like, that is crazy to me. So yeah, much love to everybody who has listened, everybody who has engaged, who's interacted, shared it with a friend, hit me up and sent it, like, just all of it. I really do appreciate it. God is to be glorified every single time, because anyway, maybe this is not a Christian podcast, but testimony may be incoming. But yeah, The Independent. I'm all for authority. If The Independent say listen to the podcast, I feel like you should listen to the podcast. Like, who are we to say no? Do you know, like, who are we to say no? So that's why my mood is like sky high today, and I'm also excited for this episode. I think it's going to be an interesting one in terms of the themes and the topics we're discussing. Maybe a bit sobering, I don't know, but I think we should cut the chit chat and get to my first honorable pick. Okay, so for the first time in It's That Deep history, I have decided not to do two honorable picks this week. I've decided I'm only going to do one. And I was really debating about this. I was like, do you know what? Formats work. Just stick to your format. Be consistent with your audience. And I will probably not do this again unless it requires it. But I just felt like, actually, when I really scan what's happened this week, there's never been a better time to ask the question, what the heck is happening in the House of Commons? What's going on, baby? What is going on in the House of Commons? I feel like there's never been a more suitable time to pose that question. And so I was like, Bunny, let's do it. Let's scrap the second honorable pick, because I do have one. But almost sometimes you need to give things the gravity they deserve. And so if you've been following the news at all or watching any of the coverage of what's happening in the Commons or what has happened this week in the Commons, you know that it was just it's an absolute mare, full of chaos, full of destruction, full of just schoolboy. I mean, I've said before how I think the House of Commons is just incredibly immature, and yeah, just a lot of schoolboy errors, a lot of school ground tactics, and I feel like this was the week that demonstrated that best. So, brief sort of rundown of what happened. So basically, obviously today's Friday. I don't know when you're listening to this. Things might have even shifted by the time you're listening to this. Who knows? But Wednesday, Wednesday the 21st of February was one of what you call Opposition Day. So Opposition Day in the House of Commons is basically a day that belongs to only one of the opposing parties, and they get the opportunity to bring a proposal to the House, and then the House gathers, they discuss, they debate, and then they vote on it and they go home. And so the Wednesday just gone was Opposition Day for the SNP, so the Scottish National Party. They brought forward their proposal, and their proposal was for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. I've spoken before about everything that's happening in Israel, Gaza. I will put some resources in the description and in the show notes, just if you don't know what's going on. but their proposal was immediate ceasefire, stop the genocide. That's what they proposed. Now, like I said, on a normal day, on a normal opposition day, the Speaker of the House would take that proposal, bring it to the rest of the Commons, and everyone would vote on it and they would go home. On some occasions, the government of the day have been able to provide an amendment to the proposal. They get to do that because of the government and they represent the nation. But what sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. So that's what should have happened. But what happened this Wednesday, just gone, was that the SNP brought their proposal, the Labour Party brought a proposal, and the government brought a proposal. Like I said, the government bring the proposal, not crazy, not really like, oh, let's, lose our marbles about it, because that has happened on previous opposition days. What hasn't happened is the Labour Party or any other opposing party bringing forward an amendment to the proposal, because everybody knows that opposition day belongs to that opposing party, in this instance the SNP. So now we have on the table 3 votes. We have the SNP proposal, we have the Labour proposal, and we have the Conservative proposal. Now, this is mad for a few reasons. Like I said, it's convention that everybody knows this day belongs to the SNP. So you're wasting your breath, you're wasting your time as another opposing party to bring something else to the table, because we're not going to give it the time of day, because this is not your day. Again, very schoolboy-like, do you know what I mean? So that's why it's mad, number one, that Labour did that. Number two, it's mad because just even on a logistical level, there's 650 MPs. There's no way you can get 650 MPs to vote or to hear a proposal, to debate, to discuss amongst themselves, and then to vote on it 3 times over. Logistically, it's mad. And to do that all in one night, mad. And then the reason why it's even the maddest is because Labour's amendment to the proposal, to the SNP proposal, would, in the event that it happened, in the event that they voted on it, would have been a complete reversal of the SNP proposal. So like I said, SNP's proposal was for an immediate ceasefire. They said stop the fight, not even fighting, stop the genocide. Labour's amendment to that proposal was for, and I quote, an immediate humanitarian pause. This is why I say language is very important, because those are 2 very, very, very different things. One says stop the genocide. Another says just put it on pause. Just put it on hold for the moment. Do you not see now why I can't mess with Labour? I literally cannot do it. So Keir Starmer's and his party's amendment to the SNP proposal was not to stop the genocide, just to put it on hold for the moment. And so they made that amendment, the government made that amendment, and the Speaker of the House, who was supposed to be an impartial figure, which is very important, said we're going to vote on all 3. Like I said, in the event that had happened, and I say in the event that happened because actually everybody turned around. Well, the SNP and Conservative MPs turned around and were like, you cannot do that. And they started walking out of the House of Commons. This is what I mean when I'm talking about chaos and schoolboy behaviour. So they walked out of the House of Commons. But in the event that they did not do that, the House of Commons would have voted that night on 3 different amendments. And because Labour brought their amendment secondary to the SNP, if everybody had voted in favour of Labour's proposal, it would have completely overturned whatever they voted for on the SNP proposal and basically made it redundant and made it of no effect. I hope that explanation made sense. I hope I explained it properly. But so now there's been like accusations of people playing politics. Like I said, the Speaker of the House is supposed to be impartial, despite that he is a Labour MP, but he's supposed to be impartial. And they're saying that he did that in order to basically help position Keir Starmer in the best way possible ahead of the election, because at the last vote on the ceasefire, he enforced his whip and he was like, everybody in his party has to vote the same, and the same is we're not voting for the ceasefire. Some of his MPs didn't do that. Some of them rebelled against him, and that was like, oh, now we're all questioning Keir Starmer's leadership. So that was a blow to him. They didn't want it that to be the case the second time round. So they're saying that that's why the Speaker of the House allowed his proposal to go through. Whilst I believe that all of them are mad, and whilst I'm also internally, I remember I said it a few weeks ago, like, I'm getting to the point where I'm not sure I even believe in democracy anymore. And I think this week maybe was a nail in the coffin. It was like, you lot are stupid. This is how you lot are playing with the lives of Palestinians. Madness. But whilst all of those are all the thoughts that I'm having, and, you know, I'm not sure I believe in democracy anymore, and I'm not sure, I'm even certain that all of them are mad. I think what grieves me the most and what frustrates me the most is the fact that we are all now talking about, is the Speaker of the House going to survive? There's been calls for his resignation. Is he going to survive? We're all now talking about, oh, did Keir Starmer just avoid a rebellion? We're all now talking about, you know, the SNP and, you know, the Conservative Party. And I believe there's a time and place for all of that. I absolutely do. They all need to get flogged accordingly. But it grieves me that actually them playing politics, and I keep saying it, doing their schoolboy tactics to position themselves as best as they can with their parties and with the public ahead of the election, that has overridden the main reason everybody gathered to vote in the first place, which was stop the genocide. I mean, it is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous, because we're now all, there's think pieces, there's articles, there's columns all about, is the Speaker going to survive? Is he needs to quit? Like, that's great. But we're losing sight of the main reason why SNP called the vote, which was to stop the genocide. Let's have an immediate ceasefire in Palestine right now. And yeah, I think it's harrowing to watch in real time people sort of play, is it chess or checkers? I don't even know. But like chess and checkers, and be strategic and be basically the antithesis of what a public servant should be, all because they want to win political points and all because they want to win the next election. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying there's a time and place where you literally, like, you need to carry the mantle of a public servant, and a public servant serves the public, and you put the public ahead of yourself. And the public, for the most part, are saying ceasefire. And when the forum was created for that to be voted on, everybody decided, no, we're going to be really tactical and really strategic, and we're going to play games. And that vote didn't even end up getting voted on. Like, I don't know, for this country, you know, I can't lie. I'm very big on like confession and speaking life and, you know, speaking positively. And if you know me personally, you know, that's my bag. But I'm also very heavy on flogging people. Hello, I believe in flogging people, and I feel like they all need to be flogged. I feel like it's a really sad day when the vote, or what is a potential vote on like, do we stop children being murdered and massacred, turns into, oh, I could use this for political gain. I think it's a very, very sad day. And so that's why I was like, bro, scrap that other honourable pick. Nothing is really as important. We got to weigh it up. And I think there's just a real lack of integrity and a real lack of selflessness for people who are in the office of public service. Like, yes, yeah. So I think I'm at that point, unfortunately, where I'm just like, and I'm still debating in my head, I don't know how the heck I'm going to vote. But I do think I'm at that point now where it's like, yeah, wrap this thing up right now. Wrap it up right now. I can't with this country. I can't with the self-serving politicians. I don't know. I think I'm at that point of apathy now. So we'll see. But I wanted that to be my only honourable pick for this week. Like I said, I wanted to give it the gravity it deserved. And also explain it, because it took me a while to get my head around it, to be honest with you. I had to do a lot of reading and a lot of, just a lot of studying on that. So I hope I explained it and I hope it made sense. But yeah, let's move on to our main story. Okay, so my main story for this week was triggered by some really sad news that I came across on social media. And that news was the passing of a young lady by the name of Aisatu Beadford-King. She passed in the week just gone, and she was a sickle cell warrior and advocate. She used her platform quite a lot to speak about living with sickle cell. And just to bring awareness to that. And unfortunately, she passed the week just gone. And so, of course, condolences and well wishes to everyone that knew her, all of her family and her loved ones. And as I've probably said before, I'm not really big on politicizing death, particularly so soon after, it happens. But, her passing did trigger a thought in me. And then my mind started to go to articles that I've read in recent weeks. There was a story about a black woman in Liverpool. I think she was just over 30 who died in pregnancy. And there was a report that came out, I want to say like maybe 9 days ago, that basically put her death down to cultural and ethnic biases. And then I was even reading an article last night in The Guardian that reported that black children are far more likely to have complications post appendicitis surgery than their white counterparts. And so again, like I said, I don't like to politicize death, but there are certain events that make me think about how much gravity the healthcare system and how much importance people in general place on black diseases and black ailments and black patients in healthcare. And so that's really where I want to land for this main story. As always, I try to approach things from like a social perspective, particularly on issues like this, because I really am not a healthcare professional. Please do not come here looking for medical advice, because you're not going to find it. So I will not be talking about the ins and outs of sickle cell. There's actually a really good episode of a podcast I listened to about sickle cell. I'll link it in the show notes and in the description. And that podcast is actually led by two black women. So if you want all that information, like the medical ins and outs of it, please go there and please, do your research on that. But I really want to, I guess attack it from like a social and like interpersonal angle, because I do think as much as, and I guess this is the difficult thing with like health, because there's many factors that bleed into someone's demise. But for me, I'm really interested in like, I'm just gonna just bias. I'm really interested in the role that bias plays in these things, and how there's so many trends. Like the trends can't be explained by science alone. And so when I saw the news of Aisatu's passing, and then, I was reminded of all these articles that I'd read, my mind went to a philosopher that I'd read quite a lot of at uni. She's called Miranda Fricker, and she basically has a theory called testimonial injustice. And her theory basically says that in what she calls testimonial exchanges, which is basically just conversations, a really fancy way of saying conversations, in testimonial exchanges that happen between people on a day-to-day basis, you have obviously a listener and you have a hearer. So in this context, for example, although it's not really a conversation in that you can't speak back to me, I am a speaker, you are a hearer. And in each exchange, in each testimonial exchange, the listener will give a certain level of credibility to what the speaker is saying based on multiple reasons. But she says that one of the prominent reasons is bias. So for example, you that are listening to me right now, or you're watching me, let's say this is your first time listening to this podcast, you don't know who the heck I am, you've never engaged with my content before, I could be a fraudster for all you know. The chances are you are probably going to give less credibility to what I'm saying, simply based on the fact that you don't know me. Just that's point blank, period. And so she basically says in every interaction, in every conversation, bias plays a role in the credibility you give to the person that you're listening to. And so I was thinking about that, because I wrote my undergrad dissertation on this theory. And I was thinking this definitely is a factor that plays into the trends and the statistics that we are seeing countless times when it comes to black patients and ignoring, black pain and black trauma and all these things. And Aisatu's cousin has actually come out and said we can't pinpoint that as the reason for her death just yet. And that's why I say it's definitely an amalgamation of things. But coming from my perspective, I think it's one of the primary things as to why we're seeing the trends that we are seeing. So I guess to dig a bit deeper into Miranda's thesis, she says that in every conversation, in every testimonial exchange, people are subconsciously weighing up whether they want to give the person they're listening to credibility excess or credibility deficit, and it's people who enjoy credibility excess that are often listened to way more. And so the factors that affect whether or not you give credibility deficit or excess are all rooted in identity. So your identity as a listener, the identity of your speaker, and then also those identities in relation to one another. So an example I use quite often is like football punditry and football commentary. So obviously football is very much a male dominated sport, from pundits to commentators to players to coaches to managers, very male dominated. And I remember there was an example a few months ago of Eniola Aluko, and she, guys, I don't know much about football, so bear with me, but she made one comment, I think it was deadline day, and she was like, oh, this club is going to buy this player, and people got on her, they dragged her on Twitter, they were like, she doesn't know what the heck she's speaking about, only for her prediction to actually come to pass a few days later. Now, in that testimonial exchange, she was given less credibility by people who in their minds assume that she doesn't know enough about football to make such an assertion. Why? Because she's a woman. Her identity, in contrast to their identity, for the most part men, meant determined the level of credibility those men gave her statement, when she actually turned out to be correct. So that's how identity and bias plays out in our day-to-day conversations. And so that's just one example, but like I said, it plays out all the time. And I think with the trend that we're seeing, like there's, you know, reports yearly, I mean, for the last like 3 or 4 years, about how Black women, you know, are 4 or 5 times more likely to, you know, die in pregnancy or childbirth. Like there's so many statistics that point towards Black patients not being taken seriously by healthcare professionals, even some of their own race, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. There's so much evidence that points to that. It's not simply science alone. Science alone can't be the only reason why Black women are dying, do you know what I mean, at that crazy rate in comparison to white people. For me, a very large element is bias, racial bias, and the credibility people give their claims, because oftentimes, you know, I think about Nicole Fear, the YouTuber who passed away during childbirth. You know, the complaint and the claim is always the same, is that they don't listen, they don't take my pain seriously enough. And it is often, you know, the white midwives or the white, you know, doctors who dismiss pain, not because they're racist. And I think this is where we get into techie ground, because we can't just go around calling everybody racist. But it's not because they're racist, it's because there's unconscious bias that means that, or that plays into the level, the weight and the gravity that you give somebody's claim of pain. I think that the cop out and the easy thing to do is just say, oh, they're racist, and so that's why they're not listening to me. But actually it's a very complex and layered issue where, particularly in healthcare, and again, I'm not a professional, so please listen to the professionals, but at least historically there has been claims and widely held beliefs that Black people have a higher tolerance for pain, so they can take more pain than the average person. And so that was a way of thinking that people introduced during slavery to justify the atrocities that they were doing to Black people, you know, the beatings and the killings and all of that stuff. They used that line of thinking to justify that behavior. And like I've said, you know, those were people who held those beliefs, but ultimately people gather and make institutions in society. And so when people with that line of thinking gather and make an institution, that institution falls in line with that line of thinking. And so then that's trickled down all throughout slavery, to the point that there's evidence and there's papers and reports that show that if Black people in the UK and the US request pain medication, they're less likely to be given it, because people genuinely believe that Black people have a higher tolerance for pain, and so their requests for pain relief are not taken as seriously because of that line of thinking that someone came up with however many, you know, decades ago. And so it could be as simple as, oh, they're just racist, so they don't listen to me, but actually it's way more complex than that. And there's actually, you know, mindsets and systems that people have in their minds that actually have to be knocked down and built up back again in order for complaints that Black patients make to be given credibility. So I think about the Black lady that died in Liverpool, and I think about, you know, the young Black children who are suffering more after the appendicitis surgery. And I think about Aisatu, and yes, science could absolutely be used to explain all of these things, but I think when I think about the goal of this podcast and what this sort of stuff is supposed to tell us about who we are, I think it's really a call for us, black or white, whatever race we come from, whatever gender we come from, to really assess where we subconsciously allow our perception of different demographics to bleed into the level of credibility we give what they say. That sounded like a lot of jargon, but I hope it makes sense, because credibility is really what is important. Like, you're not going to listen to this podcast if you don't think I'm a credible source. You're not going to follow someone on Twitter because you think they're a credible source. You're not going to watch their show, or you're not going to engage with their content if you do not think they're a credible source. So I think everything boils down to credibility. You know, that's why when people debate and they argue on really like contentious issues, people are very quick to assert, you know, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years. Oh, I studied this. I read this book. I did this degree. It sounds pompous. It sounds arrogant, but subconsciously what it is an attempt to show that I have credibility. So people are always looking for credibility. And I think it's difficult because we don't even know that we do not offer credibility because of our biases that we don't even know we have. And so again, it sounds like a lot of jargon, but my mind, upon hearing the news of Aisatu's passing and then reading these articles, is that when we think about wanting massive change in society with institutions, you cannot change an institution if you don't first start with the people. The people are who make up the institution, and the people have to have certain belief systems and certain biases uprooted before the institution can change. Yeah, this main story turned to be like really theory heavy, but I actually think a lot of these theories are really good for explaining human behavior that we see play out on a day-to-day basis. So I hope it all made sense. A bit of a very much, at least for me anyway, very much like an introspective one, because like I always say, black people are not void of black biases. Although the context that we're talking here is actual black bias against black people, but we are also not void of biases. And so just, yeah, I guess like a call to do some introspection and check myself and check my biases and the credibility I give and all that good stuff. And so, yeah, I don't like depressing you people. I hope you're not depressed. But anyway, that is the end of episode 11. Thank you for joining me for another episode. I want to know what you think I should talk about, because I feel like we see so much, we consume so much in a week. I can only see so much as well. Like, there's probably things you guys are seeing on your timelines and, you know, in your newspapers that you think could be cool to talk about. So hit me up, man, let me know, and I will catch you next week for another episode. Thank you again. All of the like references, the articles, the things to read, the things to listen to will be in the show notes and the YouTube description box, so definitely check them out in your own time. But until next week, I will love and leave you. See you next week.